Hello, welcome to On the Roadmap, a project manager's guide to growing in your career, getting promoted, and succeeding at work. Each episode, I interview a project manager in our community to hear about their stories, strategies, and lessons. I'm here to provide you with specific things you could take away from each episode to grow in your career. And I'm going to assume that if you're watching, you're as pressed for time as we all are. So I'm going to skip the usual podcast fluff and go right for the insights. I'm Michael Yaroshevsky, the founder and CEO of Visor.us, which is also the sponsor of this podcast. Visor is the modern, flexible, and beautiful portfolio project management solution that syncs both ways with your other apps like Jira and Asana. Today's guest is Michele Badie. She's a program and project manager who recovers spiraling projects, drives change, and improves processes. She's currently a program manager level 2 at PPLSI. Let's get her on the roadmap. Hi, Michele.
Hi, how are you, Michael?
I'm great. It's so wonderful to have you. As is tradition here on the show, we get to know you by getting right down to business. Our viewers are interested in unique perspectives. So the first thing I'd like to ask you to share is, what is one thing that you believe about project management that few others recognize or understand?
That it is the undercurrent force of organization that brings an idea from ideology to full fruition. Every idea needs project management, and it
Mhm.
is the essence of productivity and also just bringing it to reality.
Hmm. How do you make that concrete then? That makes some sense to me, but I'm trying to really get that down into the essence.
So understanding the scope,
Yeah.
understanding the what stakeholders want, understanding the purpose of the project, who needs to be at the table, who needs to have a seat at the table, how is this going to be funded, what is this going to transform, who is it impacting, is everyone in a part of the conversation that needs to be a part
Yeah.
of the conversation. And one key point that I think sometimes is overlooked is when you're planning out a project, it's very essential to keep the end user in mind. Who is this for? What do they need? How is their voice included? Do you understand how they utilize the product or the service or in the intended project, and what impact it will have and how it will be transforming? And will it be embraced? Will it be something that's effective long term, or is it something that's going to have you going right back to the drawing board again because all the questions weren't asked during discovery or everyone at the table was not there?
Sounds like you know what you're talking about. You had that ready to go in your back pocket. Uh,
I
that
love
makes
project management.
that makes me excited for what's to come. So I might refer to you as Dr. Beatty because I feel
Oh.
like when projects go off the rails, it's kind of like a sick patient. So let's take that frame for a moment. I know that you say that you like to champion recovering projects that have gone off course or gone ill a little bit. So Dr. Beatty, what is the most common and avoidable thing that causes projects to go off course?
Communication. Communication is usually the baseline for the introduction of scope creep, or lack of
Mhm.
communication is the introduction of scope creep. Also, just an analysis, an overall analysis of the project and what needs to happen. Did you ask the right questions? Were you reluctant to ask the right questions? Did you operate from a place of assumption?
Hmm.
And one thing I think is always a best friend to project managers and program managers, if the resources um, accessible, is archived
Hmm.
information, what's happened in the past. Have you reviewed the documents? Were the documents thorough? If not, go back to the person who created the documentation if it wasn't you, and ask, well, what happened? I think the biggest thing in communication that isn't always applied is communicating with empathy, because life is lifing, right?
Yeah.
Like, life is lifing. We are busy, and sometimes we don't know why communication wasn't the way it was. But we don't want to bring someone into the conversation and they're being perceived as being scolded or did not understand what they were doing. Maybe they did and there was a hindrance. We don't know. It is our responsibility to make sure that it's a psychological safe place to share at all times, to be able to
Hmm.
usher in the information that we need to make sure that our decisions that we propose to stakeholders is concise, accurate, and something that can be implemented.
Hmm. So I think communication is something that most people probably think they do right, but don't. So, it's such a repeated sort of ism that you've got to communicate well. What, in your opinion, is the blind spot that people have when it comes to communicating?
I would say the blind spot is that sometimes people unintentionally assume they know the answer based off of their own experiences and not completely aware that another opinion can be differing and
Mm,
be the answer that you need. It's not, I often find it's never intentional. I just think if you've done something for so long, like if someone works in the customer service industry and they're like, may I take your order? Sometimes they don't think to ask if you want to upgrade that order, because it's
yeah,
like a routine. So I often do not think it's ever intentional. I think it's almost just status quo. You're going through this, you've done this so long, you can predict what people can do or what,
yeah,
what will say. But sometimes you just need to take that intentional pause.
I like that. Yeah, it's being courageous enough to ask those questions that everybody thinks there's an answer to, but maybe everybody has a different answer. Yeah, that makes sense. So, all right, Dr. Beatty. So we've got our diagnosis. Let's go on to sort of the cure or the fix. The prescription. So let's say a project has gone off course for these reasons. What is a concrete action plan? Let's imagine we've got a viewer today who is in the thick of it right now and they are watching this and you are their only hope to get this project back on track. No pressure.
No
But
pressure.
what what specific actionable advice would you give them to get the project back on track? Where do they start?
Go back to the plan and review the scope. Start with the scope and then make sure that every stakeholder voice has been heard because you're dealing with introverts and
Mhm,
extroverts. Make sure that every stakeholder's opinion has been heard and review the documentation and be confident in what you know how to do as a project manager assessing a project to identify scope creep,
mhm.
pivot that needs to happen. You need to trust, you're in that role for a reason. You're
Yeah.
in that role because you have done the work, got the certification or the experience or both that qualifies you to be in that role. So trust yourself.
Mm,
Trust yourself that you will uncover what needs to be uncover or discover, right? What
yeah.
needs to happen and go through your training, which you've been trained to do to how to set up a project, do an analysis of a project, and just trust yourself in the process. Don't be afraid to ask questions because a lot of project management is everyone's learning at the same time, discovering at
Mhm.
the same time. Okay, do we need to apply more agile? Do we need to be more waterfall? Do we need to like figure out something else? Like we are very much in a hybrid environment and that is ever changing. It's not evergreen, it's ever changing, but we have the foundations and that.
Mm,
So I say, trust your gut, go through your processes as you need to, and do not be afraid to ask questions.
I like that. So let's talk about scope creep for a second
Okay.
and pin this on the executives because that's often it usually comes from the top, right? The project kicks off and then something changes, and I'm guilty of this here at Advisor. Occasionally, something will come up, and a decision will be made after the project's underway. So, how do you, if that's what caused the project to become ill? How do you work with those executive or senior stakeholders to get that project back on track while maintaining that relationship?
For me, the key is remembering that you're always building trust with people. The
Mm,
key to quality relationship, the key to quality communication, because you want people to talk back to you and trust you and share things, even if it's nothing that was not something favorable for them, you still
mm,
want the lesson learned, right? So the key is focusing on building trust. And what does that look like? What are their pet peeves? Communicate in their language. As project and program managers, we need to be adaptable to the stakeholders that we serve. So, in doing that, we need to be flexible in how we communicate and also create that safe space to share.
mm,
And do your research, right? Everyone's time is valuable, and you need to be intentional to show that you understand their time is valuable by doing your due diligence. And what does that mean? That means show up with solutions along with answers
mm.
based off of the research I've done, based off the findings I have to date. These are my proposed solutions. Do you have time to noodle this with me, brainstorm? Let's figure out if this is it. Like, and I always preface it as this proposed solution is a baseline of understanding to start the conversation to
Mm.
figure out the answer based on you, because I am not a decision maker.
Hmm.
It is my responsibility to give you information, resources that can help you make the best decision for this moment to course correct and move forward.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there, especially about coming not just with the problems, but some solutions to noodle on. We joke sometimes internally about whether you're a problems person or a solutions person, and sometimes you're just a problems person. You're just like, I know this is wrong, but I don't have a fix yet. But I think when you have those executive conversations or those senior conversations with the decision maker, it's
Mhm.
helpful to have guided them or to guide them to where you see the solution. Because I think the other risk is, let's face it, if you have that ability to really understand the project at a level that's perhaps deeper than that individual who's making the decision, your perspective is really valuable, and the solutions that you come to the table with might be better than if you just let them come up with them on their own. You're really managing up in a way. Um,
And they will, and as you work longer, it's just so true, Michael. As long
yeah,
as the longer you work with people, they trust you, right?
yeah,
So as you flex your project management muscles and knowledge and in findings and all of that, in your ability to collaborate and your ability to actively listen, they're gonna want that from you. It's beyond expectation. They're gonna
mm,
want you to bring that to them because they realize you're making their job easier. You're letting them indirectly let their hair down and breathe and say,
mm,
I'm not really sure if I know the answer, but together, that collaboration piece, we can figure this out. And it's a safe space. You're moving forward, and it turns into a playground of finding your answers versus like you loathe even getting on the call.
mm,
Right?
yeah.
We can set the tone for how to overcome this. Is it going to be a good experience, or is it going to be one that you dread and you just want to
Yeah,
avoid?
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk about career advancement a little bit. Once again, thinking about our viewers tuning in with the goal of advancing their career. I believe that it's generally common for project managers to have in their past some type of project they've worked on that significantly advanced their career in some way. And I was wondering if you had a story to share with us today about a project that you worked on that you think was, your moment where you really shined and it helped you build your career up a level, um, earn the trust of those people that were your important stakeholders. If you wouldn't mind breaking it down, what what was that experience, and why do you think it resulted in career advancement for you versus just being another one of your projects?
Okay, so for me, Michael, it wasn't a specific project. My journey into project management was very unexpected. I
Huh.
used to be a director of career services for a for profit higher education institution. And due to workforce reduction, I no longer had my role. But while I was in that role in my free time, I had started a podcast called Career Tipper. And I was interviewing different people. And one of the guests, Aisha Watkins, who is the founder of Women in Project Management, after I interviewed her, she's like, Michelle, are you interested in project management? I said, I am. However, I've been told I wouldn't be a good project manager. And she's like, well, why is that? And
Yeah,
so I started explaining, my story to her. She
yeah.
said, that's not true. She was like, let me explain this to you. So she helped me curate a roadmap, right, of what it would take for me to become, to help me recognize, to build my confidence to be a project
Mm,
manager. And then two, she was like, you need to go ahead and get your certification. So together, she mentored me into helping me figure out what roles to go for, how to recognize a project management role that maybe not be a project management title.
mm,
And over that course of the year, over the years, I became PMP certified. I became certified
nice.
Scrum Master. I got into the project management roles, and this until I be my project management role goal is to work in the PMO, which I do now.
Mm,
So it took years, it took time. Um, and by doing the being the having a career centered podcast, I held myself accountable to be my own project, to be a student of my own work. Because you can tell people do this all the time, but it's different when you can also say you learn from what you taught others, right?
Hmm.
So for me, it's just been an amazing experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it wasn't a project, it was a person, really, and it
Mhm.
was so that's so critical. These random chance meetings that we have with people that believe in us or help us believe in ourselves. Um,
Yep.
yeah, I have a similar experience for what kind of pushed me into entrepreneurship. I was having a meeting with somebody, and I said, I would love to go work at a company to learn about entrepreneurship. And this individual basically said, well, the best way to learn is by doing it. Why don't you go start right now? And it was just that little extra push from the behind that kind of got me into it. But it's really important to have people believe in you, and I think that just reinforces for all of us the need to look around for the people that we're meeting and see where we can help them believe in themselves too. And I think that's a core part of my personal mission that I take really seriously. And it sounds like that, that was that person for you that you met that helped you sort of make that career change into something that you're obviously so passionate about.
I
Uh,
am very passionate about it.
yeah,
And I agree with you, Michael. It's not just about receiving, it's about giving, it's about paying it forward, taking
yeah,
the time to have the conversation. So now pretty much anyone that will come and ask me a question about project manager or project management, I take the time to talk to them because what if she didn't talk to me? It
yeah,
changed my life for the better. So that's
yeah.
a sensitive spot for me. And I agree. You need to pay it forward. You just never know how you're going to help someone get clarity on what's right for them.
That makes sense. Well, we're approaching the end of the show, and I have one final question I always love to ask, which is
Okay.
what question do you want other project managers who come after you on the show to discuss or talk about?
Um, okay, good question. So, what comes to mind is how do you ensure alignment and buy in when priorities are shifting for a project?
How do you make sure you have buy-in and alignment when priorities are shifting? Okay. That's a hard one. We're in the middle of a project right now where priorities are shifting. We're going around the room to make sure everybody's bought in. I'm excited to ask that on a future interview and see what we get, and I'll report back to you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
well, that's about all the time we have for today. But thank you so much, Michelle or Dr. Beatty, for joining us. Uh, Thank you to Visor for sponsoring the show. And thanks to the viewers for tuning in and joining us today. Until next time, I'll see you on the roadmap.